Good evening, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. We're just giving people 2 more minutes and we'll start at 6:05 East African time. Feel free to type in the chat where you're coming from. I can see there's Senegal, there's Ghana, there's Kenya, there's South Africa, there's Nairobi, there's France. Welcome to YUX webinar on wellness. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon from wherever you signed in. My name is Anne Njoroge, a user experience designer. Thank you. Welcome everyone from Nepal. You can see the latest entrant, is from Nepal. So thank you so much, Alia. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our guests. My name is Anne Njoroge, a user experience designer from Ardasha Designs, which is a consultancy firm in Nairobi, representing from UX Kitchen, Nairobi. It's a great honor to be a moderator and host for the day. As you can see on your screen, our topic for the day is on researcher wellness in Africa, and this was inspired by the 2024 report of the state of user research in Africa by YUX Ghana. Sasha, perhaps you can share the link to the report so that anyone who's not accessed it can have a look at it later on. And this is a topic that I'm passionate about because it is crucial for our well-being and productivity, and not just at a personal level, but it is also important for the sustainable development and progress of our continent, Africa. UX is an emerging sector in Africa, and as we navigate the different challenges and opportunities presented by our dynamic and rapidly evolving professional landscape, it's important that we learn to prioritize our health, happiness, and overall wellness, mainly because our collective success as a people hinges on each and everyone's ability to thrive personally and professionally. In today's webinar, we are going to explore various innovative strategies presented by teams from different sides of the continent. So we are going to have 3 sessions, one by YUX Design in Ghana, the other one by Empathetic Intervision, based in South Africa, and Ndidi, Nigeria. Lastly, we are going to wrap it up by a Q&A session by all the 3 organizations. Now, to start us off, we are going to have Sasha Ofori, a UX researcher from UX Design. Fun fact about Sasha is she does not like jollof rice. Welcome, Sasha. I'm sure I'm correct on that one. I didn't lie.
We'll take it as such, honestly. Thanks, Anne. Let me just pull up and share my screen. Kindly let me know if my screen is being shared. Is my screen sharing? Awesome. Awesome. So thank you so much, Anne, for the amazing introduction and also just sort of setting the tone for our discussion today. So just a little introduction about me. Anne has already done it with the jollof rice. I will share a little bit about me and also share about my organization, SoUXR2023 Design as well. So my name is Sasha Ofori, and I am one of the co-leads for the State of UX in Africa report. And I'm super happy that we get to do this webinar today as well. I am also one of the UX researchers at SoUXR2023 Design, which is a research and design agency based in Senegal with about 50 teammates across the African continent. And really, our mission at SoUXR2023 is to make design and research more accessible to organizations, building products and services for African users. I am Ghanaian, as Anne already said, and currently based in Ghana. And I've been in the industry, getting to my 4th year in the next couple of months. So now that we have the introductions out of the way and you know who I am as well, I'm going to kickstart our conversation today with the topic of the stresses of working in the UX profession. As Anne, the topic of mental health is one that I'm personally also passionate about. And just because as UX professionals, we are sort of constantly advocating for the needs and wants of users and the intersection of businesses, I, however, strongly believe that we also sort of need to pause and think about how the constant state of advocating, empathy, and putting users at the center of everything we do also affects us and our well-being as professionals. And it's for this reason why we've intentionally dedicated time and resources in getting to really understand the researchers' mental health within our 3rd edition of the State of UX in Africa report, and also just dedicating a whole webinar on this topic to expand more about this. So to start the conversation, before I pass it over to my other amazing speakers on the panel, I would sort of touch on what stress looks like for the average researcher or designer. What does it mean to be stressed out or burning out? And what does the data we collected on the 3rd edition of the State of UX also say about how UX professionals are feeling within the past year? My other speakers will speak broadly about maybe like the practicalities of overcoming these stresses as a UX professional. So I would like to sort of prelude my conversation just by saying stress seems very inevitable and can happen to anyone at all, no matter the industry you find yourself in. And this can be due to various factors such as high cost of living, economic instabilities in countries, just to mention a few. And these can sort of evoke stress and might eventually lead to burnout without the proper interventions. Therefore, though this conversation is sort of centered around UX professionals in Africa, for sure, some of these things we will discuss today might also resonate with other professionals who might not necessarily be UX professionals. So don't worry, it's okay. You're warmly welcome as well to listen along. So what exactly is stress and why does it even matter? I believe the word stress is one of the sort of top ranking words in the vocabulary of all working professionals worldwide, maybe. And I know we are sort of very familiar with this because we use this on a daily basis. But just to set the tone, I want us all to be aligned, and I'll just touch base briefly on the definition as well here. So in terms of the feeling of stress, it's sort of our body's way of telling us that there's something wrong, or there's a challenge somewhere in our body. We sort of need to pause and address that. And when we perceive danger, whether it's real or in our minds or imagined, it's our body's defense mechanism kicking into very high gear in a very rapid automatic process known as a fight or flight reaction, or simply put, stress response. And this response can manifest itself in diverse ways to prompt you that something is not quite right. These responses can manifest in one or all of these categories within your human self, either being an emotional response with constant anxiety, restlessness, lack of concentration, a body response of fatigue, frequent headaches, migraines, a mind response with memory problems, constant racing thoughts. You sort of just can't shut your mind off. All of these sort of affect your behavior as well, with you sort of withdrawing from your social activities, you just being very reclusive and all of that. And sometimes some of these symptoms can be felt all at once within a very short period, and can be induced by maybe a very sudden change of events in our lives. And sometimes this load of stress can seem to wear off once this situation that we're in is sort of sorted out. Yet, other times, the feeling of stress just feels as though you're constantly carrying these loads of blocks on your back, tied around your legs, running out of breath. You're constantly exhausted, barely keeping your head above water. I like this quote on the slide over here that states that it's not the load that breaks you, it's the way you carry it. So in our lifetime, we might all generate this load one way or the other, but if we do not know how to dispose of it properly, it keeps on piling up until we cannot bear it any longer. And once this load is not carried properly, and I say properly meaning by seeking help and avenues to rid of the load and sort of lighten the stress you feel, we end up in the burning out or the burnt out state. Here, the process of burning out or the burnt out state is a state of emotional, physical, mental exhaustion caused by prolonged and excessive stress. And we'll just contextualize this within the work activities of UX professionals, since we're talking about UX professionals for today. And this is sort of categorized by an intense stress of overwhelming exhaustion, which can last for an extended period of time due to chronic unresolved stress. And usually the response to this is by emotional depletion, detachment, and a sense of ineffectiveness and the lack of drive to just put one step ahead of the other. So in our third edition of the State of UX, when we surveyed 134 participants across 20 plus African countries, in that survey, we asked a number of questions actually under different themes such as research methods and tools, salaries, compensations, and also most importantly for this webinar, some of the factors that affect researchers' mental health and productivity. And out of the people we surveyed, more than 50%, actually very specifically, 60% of people mentioned that they had experienced effects or symptoms of burnout within the past year, which really goes to show the importance of getting these conversations started, focusing on professionals within the UX circles to really learn more about their mental health and how it really affects their work. And across the different maturity levels, more of the mid-level researchers are sort of taking the burnt end of the stick, with about 45% stating feelings of burning out within the past year. And this could be attributed to a myriad of factors, of which I will mention some in the next slide. But it's also very profound to sort of mention that the UX industry on the African continent is a very young and small sort of industry, but definitely a maturing one because there's a growing demand as well. However, just looking at this data, the growing and maturing force are already getting burnt out before hitting the levels of maturity to even sustain the industry on the African continent, which is quite concerning. And as we see on this slide, there are a lot of factors that is causing a lot of UX professionals to feel burnt out. However, I would like to draw our attention to the last factor over here stating on empathy overload, which is mostly overlooked when we are speaking about mental health in the UX circles. And this is particularly prominent in UX professionals sort of conducting research within sensitive topics. They might have also experience within themselves or within their personal lives, which is unresolved, or sort of constantly having the exposure to harsh user feedback, or sort of the need to constantly extend empathy and care within the profession also sort of weighs down on the well-being of researchers, especially when proper interventions are not provided. So here we can see that most of the people affected by sort of empathy overload are mostly within the entry level of their career, sort of people who are still figuring things out as well, learning, exploring as well. However, their design and research education focuses mostly on the technicalities, which is obviously very essential, but sort of little to no effort is really done to support UX professionals to learn how to receive harsh user feedback, how to navigate scenarios when you're conducting research in a high sensitive topic area with vulnerable people, and also like topics that reflect within yourself or your lived realities in your personal life, and just how to sort of dissociate between empathy for our users we are constantly advocating for, and empathy for ourselves as well. I'd like to mention another factor that isn't here but worthy of mentioning is how researchers and design researchers might always feel a need that our research insights need to sort of be groundbreaking, ground-shattering, always sort of breaking the earth into two, or else it doesn't bring any value. This mindset sort of also adds on to the significant stress and burnout within the profession as well, because sometimes it just gives very unrealistic expectations of innovation and originality. And in my opinion, no, your research doesn't always have to be groundbreaking and shattering everything across the earth. But as long as it can come in to confirm an already existing assumption as well, that should also be okay. And sort of contextualizing it within the space or the country you are in, that brings value as well. Finally, you might be wondering, how does this have to do with me and my work, right? Stress and burnout is maybe a very private conversation. Who would care about this within the work context, and why should I care? So as we discussed in the previous slides on the effects of stress on the self being the body, the mind, emotions, and behavior, stress and burnout adversely affects our work life. Because once you are not in a good standing within yourself, it affects how you show up to your work. It reduces your quality of work, so you are more prone to errors and oversights where you might not have initially done so. There's also sort of like, a lack of motivation. You have reduced drive to take on new challenges. You're sort of seeing challenges as blockers as compared to opportunities, right? And as researchers and innovators, really our role is to really dig into the challenges of businesses and users and try to break it apart, right? Therefore, you having like that lack of motivation becomes really detrimental to your work. Another adverse effect over here is just like poor time management. You're always like running late or maybe not showing up to things as you normally would. Another thing over here, another one of the adverse effects over here is decreased creativity and innovation. And this is one that is very crucial to our work as innovators, creatives, researchers, UX professionals, sort of the ability to go through the different journeys of iteration, brainstorming solutions to achieve innovation is sort of at the bedrock of our role as researchers, right? And the effects of stress and burnout on ourselves affects this creative side of our work as well. So at the end of the day, all of these and many factors sort of adversely affects how we show up. And I say we because I'm also one of the researchers. So I'm not just sort of like dishing information to you. It affects how we show up to our work and how we advocate for our users as well. To be able to advocate and prioritize the needs and well-beings of our participants, we, as we would hear in the next speakers, we sort of need to start with ourselves as researchers, innovators, creatives, and UX professionals. I would move myself to a pausing point and hand the mic back to our moderator, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sasha, for the elaborate and figurative presentation on the common stresses in the field of UX. And, round of applause, please, guys. Let us appreciate our speaker. I think the first thing that came to mind is, the common thing that we all put on our resumes is we work best under pressure. I'd love to hear if you guys still put that on your resumes. I hope you've been able to see some of the adverse effects that come with stress. And we would love to hear your questions and comments. Please feel free to type them in the chat. We'll come back to them at the end of the session. Our second speakers are Dr. Katherine and Dr. Lily from Empathetic Intervision. Fun fact about the both of them is they work 12,240 kilometers apart. Welcome, ladies.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is true. I am based in France, and Katherine, my partner in Empathic Intervision, is based in South Africa. So we're used to working online. Let me go share my screen first, eh?
I'll speak to you a little later.
Okie dokie. There it should be there. I hope that is showing up. Let me know when you see my screen. Yeah, all good. Okay. Thanks, Anne, and thank you to SoUXR for inviting us to give this talk. Please feel free, everyone, while we are speaking. If you have any questions, just put them up in the chat, and we're really happy to get back to them later on by the end of the session. So Katherine and I will be talking today about how to prioritize participant safety and well-being, as well as research ethics. And it's important in research to create a conducive environment, that is to say, a safe and supportive research environment for our participants. Of course, we all do this always in our research, but we can do it more intentionally when we're dealing with sensitive topics. And one of the main ways to take care of both ourselves and our participants is to empathize. And now maybe I hear some of you think, huh? Did Sasha not just say empathy overload? Huh? Empathy? Didn't that get us in trouble in the first place? But no. It might sound counterintuitive, but let me show you how that works. So at Empathic Intervision, we train integrative empathy. And empathy, what is empathy? Empathy means basically holding a space for what arises in the other person while you're doing the research. So in Empathic Intervision, we train 5 specific empathy skills: self-empathy, kinesthetic empathy, reflective empathy, imaginative empathy, and empathic creativity. And the first 3 of these 5 empathy skills are specifically important, I think, for all of you in your UX research. So these are relevant when it comes to safeguarding your own mental health and or your mental resilience. And I'm going to walk you through each of them to show you how that works. First up is self-empathy. We always say all empathy starts with self-empathy. Super important to first have self-empathy. And self-empathy is important to recognize our own triggers. So what do I bring with me that might confuse the research? And you do this by noticing first. You take some time and you prepare yourself and you wonder, how am I today? What is occupying my mind? And is this the way I want to be in this particular situation? Now, if you find that something is preoccupying you, you will need to be able to fully hold the space. And so you won't be able if something is preoccupying you. Your judgment and your interpretation will be clouded, and you risk projecting what you have in your mind onto what you hear from the other person. So it's important to notice that judgment and to first try and let go of it. Just park it for a moment, leave it aside. And then ask yourself, how would I like to be right now? For example, in a research setting, you might want to be curious and you might want to be focused, right? So try and step into this way of being, quite literally invoke it. So what do I look like when I'm curious? What do I look like when, how do I hold my body when I'm curious and focused? By stepping into it through your body, you use your body to create the state of mind. So when the body leads, the mind will follow. Sometimes you can't change it in your mind. You are preoccupied. But when you imagine, what does focus look like? What does curiosity look like? How do I hold myself? You invoke that and you change your mind. So anytime you feel overwhelmed or triggered by what your participant shares, you can use self-empathy to restore your neutrality and reopen the space to hear what your participant has to say. Next up, kinesthetic empathy. In kinesthetic empathy, we pick up and use nonverbal communication. Very often, we're not that conscious of what we signal with our bodies. We might, for instance, go and sit with our arm crossed in front of our chest like that, hang backwards a bit, which signals a closed off or maybe even an uninterested state of mind. And the same goes for your research participants. They too are often unaware of what they signal with their bodies. So it's important to read the body language and to listen to their tone of voice when they share. Is what they're trying to say congruent with what they're telling you, and is what they're trying to say congruent with the way they hold their bodies, with what they signal with their bodies? When you notice nonverbal patterns, you can point them out to them. For instance, you can say, I see that you're frowning when you talk about this subject. Is this difficult to share for you? And at the same time, with our own bodies, we can signal our interest in what they have to say. We can signal, for instance, the curiosity and the focus I was just talking about. So kinesthetic empathy helps to create rapport and connection. Something else that helps to create rapport and connection is reflective empathy. In reflective empathy, we literally reflect back what we hear the other person say. And that might feel quite unnatural at first, but everybody really wants to be heard. And paraphrasing what you hear the participants say signals that you truly hear them. Reflecting back will build confidence and trust between the two of you. And there where emotions are at play, or if what is being shared is particularly tricky, reflecting back provides you with a feedback loop to see if you understood what your participant wanted to share. So these three forms of empathy can help you to prepare, to notice, and to understand. They help you to keep your research situation on track and strengthen the intention you have with the research. Over to you, Katherine. You do have to unmute yourself first.
I noted that I should unmute myself and then I forgot. So I'm very glad to be here, and I'm joining you from really the tippy south of Africa in Cape Town, where we've been having huge storms and even some snow. So it's pretty chilly. Yeah, so to take us back to what our topic is at the moment, how do we prioritize participant safety? And I think, first of all, to say that safety is not a given, and particularly when we're working with, you know, a lot of the tricky and sensitive topics that we deal with in Africa, it's something that we as a researcher need to actually build. And so it requires actively creating what we call a conducive environment. And what we mean by a conducive environment is a space. Safety is not necessarily possible, you know, complete safety, but we can create a space that is conducive for everybody to feel comfortable to share what they need to share. And so that's comfort for the participants so that they're able to share relevant thoughts and feelings about a topic, but also for you as the researcher, that you feel comfortable enough to encourage adequate sharing, what you need to hear in your research, and also that you feel comfortable to prioritize the safety of your participants. So this we call a conducive environment. And then next there are various elements that we need in order to build a conducive environment. This is something that we would recommend when one's working with empathy in a space, to actually take moments at the beginning of a session and to actually put in place these 4 things. So first of all, we're wanting to build rapport and trust. There we can use the self and the kinesthetic empathy to, on the one hand, notice our own state of being, and then the body language or the nonverbal communication to communicate these things that Lidewij has described to you. We also want to be able to practice suspending judgment in ourselves and to communicate that in our body language, but also potentially, if you're doing groups, to contract this amongst group members in a focus group. The third thing is maintaining privacy and confidentiality. This is fundamental to research, but again, it's something that one can actively contract and explain exactly what we mean. What are the extent of the confidentiality, extent of being, you know, anonymous, and extent also of privacy. If a person doesn't want to share details about something, they have that right. And then the fourth is that we contract mutual expectations. So what do we want to be achieving in the research? What do we set out to do? Are there any repercussions? What is the expected follow-on from the research? And what is your role? What we hear quite often in research in Africa with sensitive topics is there's this kind of trust and expectation from the participants to the researcher. And it can put a lot of a load on the researcher in terms of fulfilling these expectations. So how to know for yourself, what is your role? What are you prepared to do? And how can you contract that? So we align the conducive environment with ethics in research. And according to biomedical research, of which all behavioral research falls within this banner. And so a lot of the UX user research that we're doing is related to behavioral research. There's 3 primary considerations according to these ethic conventions. And I'm happy to put a link in the chat once I've finished speaking of 2 of the documents that I work quite actively with, which I think can be good resources and references for you. I'll pop them in later, but we're looking at respect for persons. So various considerations related to this respect. We're looking also at strategically, what are the benefits of this research? How do we maximize benefit? But there also are risks or harm. For example, if we're talking about sensitive topics, we might provoke memories of traumas, for example, difficult life experiences, and this can have some perceived harm. Does the provocation of these memories actually, does the benefit outweigh this potential harm? And then the third thing is justice. So the choice of our participants, does it comply with certain considerations towards justice? So in terms of these ethical considerations, there are some obligations, and particularly related to respect for persons. This is about respect for the autonomy of the person and relates particularly to the privacy, anonymity, that nobody can ever know who shared the details, and also the confidentiality. And you may be aware of this, but very important for this is that we actually have voluntary informed consent. Again, various considerations, but to make explicit as a part of creating this conducive environment that the participants understand the research process, that we contract foreseeable repercussions and anticipated consequences, that any possible harms are considered upfront, and that all of these are, that the participant has the choice to actually at that point stop the research if they're not comfortable with it. Just to move on to the next slide, creating a conducive environment is not a one-off thing. It's something that has to happen throughout the hour or whatever your interviews or your focus groups, the time that it's taking. And so one wants to constantly be alert to participant distress. Are people just expressing some emotion, maybe shedding a few tears, and being able to continue? And this we don't want to worry about. But are they really triggered? Are they expressing distress and unable, getting into a place where they may be unable to climb out of it? If this is the case, then we want to stop, contract, maybe change our line of questioning, maybe retract or whatever it may be. But also, this is a really important point, which is going to lead very nicely into our next speaker, Amanda, where we may need to have some referrals in place. So if there is a risk that people are going to, there's going to be distress that is provoked, that we have something in place for ourselves, which I know Amanda's going to address very well, but also potentially for referral of our participants. And again, just to loop back, one last thing. This again is where we bring in the empathy, that we understand where our participant is and also where we ourselves are in terms of the self-empathy. So thank you very much. Back to Anne.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lily and Katherine. I think the one thing that stands out for me is that just popped is the need to suspend judgment. Most of the times when I'm conducting interviews and having all manner of interactions, I usually find there's a lot of mental chatter, going on. Yeah, much appreciation for the detailed presentation on research ethics that we can have in mind while engaging participants from various backgrounds. Round of applause, please. And as we get into our last session, the question that we would like to pose to our audience is, how do you cope? We would love to hear how you cope. Just keep it open-minded. Type it in the chat. We would love to hear your answers. And our third, but not last or least speaker is Amanda Iheme from Ndidi in Nigeria. Fun fact about Amanda is she is a passionate, creative psychologist. And I'm also very curious to hear more about what Ndidi does. So over to you, Amanda. Karibu sana.
Hi, Anne. Thank you so much. I'm honestly so excited to be here. I have been looking forward to this conversation since the first time you approached me and we had the conversation about it at the event. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you, everyone, joining us all over the world, different parts of Africa. And I'm also happy to have the conversation. My name is Amanda Iheme, and I'm the clinical director and lead clinical psychologist of Ndidi. Now, Ndidi is a private mental health practice that is focused on providing psychiatric and psychological care for people and also for corporate organizations and also non-governmental organizations. So we offer things like trainings and support, referrals, care, and follow-ups as well. And we also train empathy. We also do emotional intelligence. We also help people with their group dynamics and also help companies improve their work culture. So we try to be in as many places as possible because the goal is to ensure or to create access to quality mental health care for all Africans and Nigerians. So wherever we find that we're needed, we try our best to make sure that our services are available. So I'm happy that I'm here today. So can I go straight into the talk? Can I go straight into the presentation? Amazing. I see people are already leaving answers in the comment section about how they are coping. So I encourage you to continue to do that. And also just keep your mind open because I'm going to be sharing some other things that you can add to what you already have. So think expansion, not correction. So what you already have, we can build upon it. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Can I get maybe like a thumbs up in the chat box? Just to be sure you can all see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen, Amanda.
Amazing. Okay, great. So I will be talking about mental health and researchers, specifically focusing on research trauma and then also how you can take care of it. I know that many of us would have, or some of us may not have heard of research trauma or even thought that such a thing was possible. But with one thing I've learned from this practice is that as individuals, we are all unique in our own ways. And because we are unique and because we are different, the ways that things affect us in life will also be very different. So there are times when I've had to give talks about how creatives can be able to take care of their mental health. They're all human beings, but then there are specific things about the work that we do or the lifestyle that the work we do exposes us to that can have an impact on our well-being. So this is what I want to talk to you people about today. I want to talk about how research trauma can affect you and then also, well, not affect you, but what it is and then how you can take care of yourself. Looking at the organizational angle. So what is it that your institution can do for you? And I urge anyone who is a team lead, who is a research head, who is the head of a department, but someone who has a managerial role or supervisory role that's listening here today to take some of this information about how they can make their own spaces much more safer and healthier for the researchers and the team that they're working with. And if you are an individual as well, to also think about how you can begin to take care of yourself, okay? So the first thing is, what is researchers' trauma? Now, first, we need to understand what trauma is. When I explain to my clients what trauma is, one thing I always say is that imagine if you experience something that shocks you to your core and you don't have any way of processing it. It's such a sudden shock to you that your body does not have the capacity to cope with it, and it alters the way you perceive yourself, the way you perceive the world and the people around you. Now, this can happen as a singular incident, but it could also happen as multiple incidents over a period of time. So if you are under a stressful situation for a long period of time, it can lead you to have an emotional response to it that can be PTSD or, as we know, trauma. So trauma is an emotional response to an incident or a series of incidents that are emotionally disturbing. They are life-threatening. And by life-threatening, it doesn't mean that you're about to get killed or murdered. No. It's more of you feel like your safety is at risk. You feel the need to want to survive. So it could be from, the job you're doing. It could be from the lack of financial support. It could be living in a war-torn area. It could be living in an abusive household. These situations just make it difficult for you to feel like you have the capacity to thrive and to survive easily, and you find it difficult to control it. Now, trauma has a lasting effect on your functioning. It affects your mind, it affects your thoughts, it affects your feelings, it affects how you process things and even your spiritual well-being as well. So it's not just one area of your life that is impacted by it. Now, what is researchers' trauma? When I was preparing for this, I was doing a bit of research, trying to see what we have as the most recent information around a specific topic, so that if I'm providing any information for you, I'm using the most accurate thing available. And I found out that there's not a lot of research that has gone into this specific topic of research trauma, except for 2 or 3 articles that I found that were looking at it and more from an institutional perspective rather than an organizational one, but it still cuts across anyway. So researchers' trauma is a notion that's born out of the understanding that research is not just purely objective. Of course, the goal is to be objective, but it isn't an objective experience. It is an intellectually tasking experience. It is an emotionally tasking experience. It's a physically tasking experience. And these things need to be considered. Research isn't about just showing up and trying to answer questions. No, it is showing up and the journey from knowing the question that you have and the question you need to, and the way you're going to answer the questions and the results you find at the end. And that is a whole experience. So because you're going through this, you also have to navigate challenges like having limited access to resources, which could be books or articles, or even the participants for your research. It could be working with vulnerable participants on sensitive topics, reporting your finances or your findings, or even just managing the interpersonal relationships that are ongoing in your research department. So playing politics or having a toxic work culture. So all of these things all together can lead you to have a traumatic experience during your research journey. So researchers' trauma is essentially the traumatic experience or the traumatic emotional response that a researcher has as a result of their work and the lifestyle it exposes them to. So while research itself is not a traumatic experience, there are difficulties that can exist within a space that you're conducting research, maybe with the organization, maybe it could be with the people you're working with, the participants, that can cause a traumatic experience. So it's important that as institutions, organizations, departments, teams, businesses, and even individuals, we are constantly educating ourselves and seeking help to help balance our well-being as the researchers who are doing the work. Just as much as we're going to take care of the mental well-being of the participants that we're working with, and like the Lily said before, and Kat as well, when we're talking about empathy, we have to consider other people, but we cannot give what we don't have. We also have to make sure that we're doing okay first and okay before we go and expose ourselves into somebody else's life or introduce other people into our spaces. So it's important for us to think about this, to recognize these experiences and do the work of helping ourselves improve our well-being. So now, how can we take care of ourselves as researchers? What is it that we can do to look after ourselves? Now, this is where you're going to start adding to what you already have. Some of you already do some of the things that I hear, because I saw in the chat box, people said going on walks helps them feel less stressed. So that's amazing. Keep that. And I also say that read other people's comments about how they cope, because it might not be on my list, but it can also be helpful. So take other people's own experiences as your own as well. Try them out, see if it works for you, and then add to what you have already from the things I'm going to share. So how can you care for yourself as a researcher? The first is sleep, eat, exercise. Very important. When clients come into therapy and they want to talk about, challenges that they're having or problems that they're facing, the first thing we think about and talk about is, are you sleeping well? Are you eating well? Are you exercising? Because your physical well-being is important for your mental well-being. And like Lee said earlier, there was a sentence that she used, I can't remember it now, but I had it mentally, something about how the physical form. You can use your physical body to change your emotional experience, yes. So we always just ask, are you sleeping well? Are you eating well? Are you exercising? Because these things have an impact on your well-being. Improve your prioritization and have better time management. Yes, procrastination is difficult, but the more you procrastinate, the higher your levels of anxiety. So you can help reduce your feelings of anxiety by starting early, even when it doesn't feel comfortable and easy for you to do. Ask for time off and take time off. No one's going to give you an award for being the one to stay in the office the longest. Do the work of asking for breaks. Do not be afraid or ashamed to go on breaks. And do not work during your time off. Don't use your leave as a time to catch up on work that you didn't do before, because then you're not resting, you're just working, but you're having space to do something else that you've wanted to do before. That's not leave. So when you're on time off work, be off work. Set your boundaries at work and ask for clear and realistic expectations. Set boundaries between your personal life and your professional life so that you are not taking work home or bringing challenges at at home into the workspace. So know how to compartmentalize in a healthy way to maintain balance between these two parts of your being. Now, balance self-improvement, which is compassionate criticism, because we sometimes think that the best way to be the best version of ourselves is to put ourselves down. If I speak nicely to myself, I will not, be able to get the job done. Softness does not equal productivity, but you need compassion to know that you can move forward and to also acknowledge yourself as a human being. So balance self-improvement with self-affirmation. And that is knowing that as much as I'm going to criticize myself about what I'm doing, I'm also going to make space to affirm myself when I get some things right. So don't focus only on your mistakes as a way of getting better. See that you can improve yourself when you also acknowledge your strengths as well. Improve your resilience to criticism and feedback, especially when it's not positive, and understand that mistakes are a learning curve. They are not a statement of you being a failure. And you can practice stress relief techniques like the person mentioned before. They go on walks, a leisurely walk in the forest, or going to the beach, or doing yoga, meditation, listening to music. These can all be things that can help you reduce stress levels. And even watching Netflix, not because you're trying to avoid a problem, but more because you're trying to relax, just relax. Okay. So now let's go over to see how some other ways that researchers can help themselves. So you can have hobbies outside of work. So don't let your life simply be about your job. Have other things outside of work that you do. Have friends outside of work. Have a life that doesn't have anything to do with your work life, so you can genuinely feel that escape. Empathize with your users by decentering yourself as a researcher. Even as a therapist, there are times where, when I first started, I thought that, I'm coming in to treat people, I'm helping people get over some difficult experiences in their life. And because of that, I sort of absorb it and take it on this idea of I'm the one that's here to save them. As much as it's about helping them, I was unconsciously centering myself in a wrong space within that conversation. So it's important for you to locate yourself within the research process, to know what it is that you're there for, and to maintain that boundary. Now, as a seasoned psychologist, when I help my clients, I help my clients. And when it's time to get off work, I get off work. It's not about me, but about their healthcare. So decenter yourself sometimes and locate yourself by knowing what it is you're there for. And then have conversations with your support system, your family, have conversations with your friends. Just tell them about what you're doing and what you're going through, so they have an understanding of what you're doing and your experiences in life. And then have an electronic free and a study free day. Sometimes we're trying to, relax, and then you pull out your phone, and next thing you're looking at some article that Google is recommending that will be such an amazing thing to add to the research you're doing at work. This is not the time for that. If you're going to take time off electronics and studying, you're going to take time off electronics and studying. Put your phone away, put your laptop away, put every screen away from you, and go somewhere where you can engage with people and the real life and see what is happening outside of this laptop screen. Go on walks. Have a do nothing day if you can manage that. A day where you do absolutely nothing, and you give yourself permission to do that without feeling any deep sense of guilt or shame or inadequacy, or like, I'm not doing enough and I need to do more. So allow yourself to relax. Give yourself permission to relax. I know some people find it very difficult to relax because they have a very high negative experience with relaxing, where they think that if I relax, I'm a failure. If I rest, I'm not doing well, I'm not being productive. It's now that it's good for you to now start to seek professional support. It's not everything that you have a struggle with that you are able to overcome on your own. I like to tell my friends, people can't see the back of your head. When they say, why do you go for therapy, or why are you a therapist? It's like, you can't see the back of your head. So you need somebody else that knows you, loves you, and cares for you. And it could be your family, your friend, your therapist, to talk to you about parts of yourself. Now, family and friends would not be able to do what a therapist does, because we're objective and we're also trained to understand how the human mind works. So we will help you understand yourself better so that you're better able to support yourself and navigate life's challenges better. Now, how can organizations help researchers? Like I said before, if you're a team lead, supervisor, or you are in care of a group of people, this is a good place for you to listen. Now, companies and organizations, you need to review your policies and processes that are focused on the wellness of your researchers. What do you have in place when it comes to health and wellness? And not just physical health, but also their mental health as well. How can they access care? Because sometimes organizations and individuals who run businesses or oversee people, they'll come to us and say, okay, we want to host a class for our clients, for them to know how to take care of themselves, and we want you to talk to them about suicide, and we want you to talk to them about burnout. And I say, okay, fine, great, we have the lecture. But then I tell them, like, okay, so what is a follow-up after this? How can they access care? What do you have in place for your people to be able to access therapeutic care or physical care? If they have HMOs, do the HMOs also cover therapy? Are they allowed to be able to get that service? So don't only just talk about, when we're coming in, we're going to talk to you and have, trainings, but when they need help, how do they get it? And what are the steps that have been provided to make it possible? People would more likely quit trying to get help when you have to go like 4, 5, 6 steps to access care. So how can you simplify it that if a person feels like they're falling apart or they need help or they are stuck, they can easily do 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2, and that is all that is between them and getting care. Now, at the early stages of a research project, when you have figured out this is what we want to talk about, this is where we want to go, these are the clients we want to work with and participants, you need to now begin to talk about what are some of the stressful points and challenges that you're going to face in that. Now, you cannot know everything, but there are some things that you're likely to experience. So it's good as a team and also as an individual to take up time to assess that. What are some possible challenges that will affect us as researchers that we're most likely going to face, and how can we begin to infuse that into our research projects so that we can put in breaks, we can put time off for this, we can consider this, we can consider that. Provide clear goals and career paths for researchers so that they don't feel like I'm doing a lot of work, but I'm not getting properly rewarded for it, and I don't see how I'm going to grow and develop in this role. Let there be proper communication and frequent communication, debriefings, talking about how are you doing, how's the research going, what kind of help do you need? Giving people recognition and incentives for their work. If someone does a good job, let them know they've done a good job. There's no point hoarding compliments. You're not going to give them out to anyone else in the end, so you might as well give them to people who need them and who deserve them right now. And conduct trainings, like I said, on mental wellness, on emotional intelligence, and healthcare. Encourage regular breaks. Tell your people to go on leave. In my practice, I had to make sure I told everyone, if you're on leave, you're on leave. Don't schedule meetings on your leave day. Don't call, don't show up. It's your day off work. I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear from you. I don't want to have anything to do with you on that day. If you decide you want to come into work, that's on you. But it's important for you to know that you need to take care of yourself. Then improve people's access to physical health care and encourage them to go on breaks during research journeys. Allow them to just, take time off where they're not thinking so much about the research. When cases of bullying or abuse or harassment are brought to your table, don't try to find a way to avoid the problem because it's going to make a company look bad. It doesn't help because that's what eventually makes your company look bad. Avoiding a problem never solves the problem. It just procrastinates it. So when a client, a researcher comes up and says, oh, I've been experiencing abuse, make them feel safe, protected, and valued by investigating it and responding promptly. Don't delay it, don't ignore it, don't abuse their vulnerability. And then create and promote a network between institutions and organizations so that researchers can also gain and share insights with other researchers. You can't grow alone. So if you're working in a UX company in point A, get to know people in point B to know how they're doing and how they're coping as well. Support helps the research community thrive, not just intellectually, but also emotionally as well. Now, finally, one thing I want to mention is that whenever we are able to show up for work, we misconstrue this to mean that we're doing 100% okay when we're not. So I came up with a bunch of questions that I think are important for you to ask yourself if you're like, oh, I don't know if I need help. I don't know if I'm okay. I've been feeling a little down, but I can't really pinpoint what the problem is or what's going on. These are some good check-in questions that you can ask yourself. I believe we'll be sharing the deck after the presentation is over. I'm not sure, but if we're not or we are, you can always send me an email to request for this and I'll give it to you. Or you can just screenshot right now so you can have it with you. These check-in questions are good to ask you if you're caring for yourself. So the usual first, are you eating well? Are you sleeping well? Are you exercising well? Are you ordering food? Are you eating a balanced diet? Are you keeping your body clean? Are you keeping your space clean? How are you regulating your emotions? Do you find it difficult to calm yourself down? Do you find that you're bursting at the seams a lot of times? Do you find that you're on edge? Do you find that you're easily irritable? Are you expressing your emotions, or are you keeping things bottled in? And are you isolating yourself because you feel overwhelmed and exhausted? Are you self-sabotaging at work, where you're missing deadlines and making mistakes that you know you normally wouldn't make, you're making them? Are you procrastinating a lot? Are you giving poor results that even you yourself, you know that you're not doing the best of your best? And do you find that you're defensive with other people, that when they hold you accountable, the first reaction you have is, it's not me now, that's not what I was trying to do, you're misunderstanding me? Of course, intention is different from action. So the action is what has the impact. The intention, you're the only one that knows it because it's in your mind. So when people are trying to talk to you, do you find that you are being defensive? There was something that we said earlier. I'm trying to remember what it was. Oof, tip of tongue. About how you're reacting to other people. I wish I could remember, but I can't. But do you find that when it's time for you to collaborate or work with other people, you get a bit defensive and you're going towards self-preservation rather than building a community? So these are some checking questions you can ask yourself to better understand if you are taking good care of yourself. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing in the chat. I saw people asking questions. I look forward to answering them. And yeah, thank you.
How many of us want a boss like Amanda?
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I'm saying, how many of us in the meeting would like a boss like Amanda, who does not allow you to schedule meetings when you're on leave?
Honestly,
Yeah.
it's important too. And it was actually a staff of mine that taught me that, like, when it was her day off, she just wouldn't show up. And at first I'd feel this, like, why is she not here? If it was me, I'll still make time out of my own break to show up. But then I had to take a pause and be like, this is leave. They are legally required to do this. And if she's on break, it's good for you, because then she's more productive when she comes back to work. So since then, anyone that's on leave, please just go and don't do anything on leave. I respect it. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the detailed presentation on how we can take better care of ourselves and also be more conscious on how to, uphold our rights as individuals. I think most of us come from a culture of being overworked and the need to continuously demonstrate, I am committed to your vision. I'm the most committed worker in this organization. So it's good to have bosses who also watch out for us. Yes. Now, we have come to the end of the various sessions, the presentations, and now we'll get into the Q&A sessions. Please feel free to keep chatting your questions. I have compiled a couple of them and I'll keep looking at the chat section. So to start us off, there was a question from one of our audience, and it says, do we need a psychologist to interpret the feeling well? I think this goes to Lily and Katherine.
Okay.
And then
no, Amanda, you really did feel like answering this question.
Oh, I should answer. You want me to take it?
No, yeah, if you feel like the feeling wheel is not, it didn't come from us, right? So, but there are many of these types of feeling wheels. And I think what's important is that you don't need a psychologist to interpret these wheels. What you want to do, they really help you to get more specific in terms of your vocabulary of your emotions. So I'm angry. Okay, I'm angry, but what does that mean? So you have secondary emotions and tertiary emotions. And so this helps you to become more specific. That's what I would answer. Maybe you have something to add, Amanda.
No, I have nothing to add. I can't add anything. It's perfectly said. Yeah.
Okay, so essentially that means you can do it on your own. The other one is, how can you ensure that empathy does not influence our research results?
Shall I start, Lily?
Yeah, use that.
I think that was from Charlotte, if I remember correctly. So I think the first thing to say is that one doesn't want to confuse empathy with sympathy or compassion or kindness or any of these other things. So we see empathy really as a very neutral practice or process or experience. And it's about, in its simplest form, holding a space for the other person to communicate or express themselves as they are. But we all are very prone to bias, preconceptions. And so that's where, according to our model, the self-empathy is so important, that you are able to look at your own preconceptions, your own biases, or even your own state of being in a moment, which can lead towards a more unnuanced observation of another person. There will always be, we always see people through our own lenses, and the more we know about our own lenses, the more we are able to potentially see the other person more clearly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. So, and for us, the practice of empathy is about learning more and more about ourselves in order that we can hold that space for the other person and to be able to observe them more clearly without our own biases. And I'm very happy if Amanda Lidewij, you'd like to jump on and add to that.
Yeah, maybe also that empathy is really not to be confused with emotional contagion, right? So what happens in emotional contagion is that you see somebody distressed or you see somebody sad and you are feeling sad or distressed too. And so that is actually a sign that you're taking on, you get emotionally contaged by what is happening in the other person. And so empathy practice is very important to understand that empathy practice is not about getting into their feeling and showing them how much you feel for them. That's not what this is about. It's very much about how, that's why we say start with self-empathy. How do I hold the space for them to express what they have to say? And as Amanda said, like, you're not 24/7 empathic. It's not possible to be 24/7 empathic. So when you're on the job, you're being empathic, you're trying to understand, you're trying to tune in, you're trying to really understand what's happening with your research participants. But when you're off the job, you're off the job and you don't have to be empathic all the time. Anything to add there, Amanda, maybe?
Yeah, it's just to continue what you were saying. I was listening to a podcast that was also talking about this emotional contagion. And one thing that the podcaster said that really stuck with me was because you're feeling what another person is feeling does not make them feel they're feeling any less. So just because you're carrying their emotions does not mean that it's going to reduce the pain that they're feeling. It doesn't do that. It's like if someone had an infectious disease and they had cholera and then you got cholera, it's not going to make their cholera levels any less. It just means that you've been impacted. So when you notice that this emotional contagion has happened, that you're feeling the sadness this person is feeling, it's a good time to take a step back, take a breather, go outside, take a deep breath, ground yourself and locate yourself again. Like, why am I here? And like Lily said, asking that question of, how can I help this person express what they're feeling? Because that's what is helpful for them. That is what lightens their load, not you carrying their emotions for them or with them. Yeah, so.
Quite profound. Sasha, would you love to add anything to that?
Honestly, everything has been said like so beautifully. So
Yeah, thank you. And I think the thought that came to mind is as much as I'm seeking to understand the products, you know, what's the level of self-awareness am I operating from as a researcher and as a designer? You know, as I'm looking to understand the products, you know, the ins and outs and whatnot, what about myself as an individual? Where am I at with my own biases, my own preconceptions? How well do I understand myself and the different lenses that I've collected over time by virtue of my different life experiences. Thank you so much for your feedback. The other question that we have in place is, how do you find the sweet spot in balancing between the psychological, sociological, and business goals as we are doing research on various services and products?
You're mute, Amanda.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. I was saying, can you please repeat the question again?
Yeah.
I think there's an individual in the audience who has an issue finding the balance between the different goals. The psychological part of things, the sociological part of things, and the business goal of whatever it is that they're researching on. So how do you prioritize?
Okay, so balancing those different.
Exactly.
How do you balance? Yeah, I think that one thing that I practice is taking out time to really sit down and map out exactly what these areas are. What is the impact it's having psychologically? What is the impact it's having sociologically? And then what is the business part of this? How do I, like, for myself, for the user, and also for the people commissioning me to do the project I'm doing the research for. So really just getting clear on what that is can really help you with the balance, because then you now know how best to focus on which one to prioritize and which one not to. Because if you leave it all in your mind and you're constantly worrying about it, you're not going to get clarity on it. So the thing to do is to seek clarity and specificity on what it is that they are. How is this impacting all of us involved psychologically? How is it impacting all of us sociologically? How is it impacting all of us emotionally, mentally, and also business-wise? All these areas I even need to report on. How do I do that? So gain that same clarity and then dedicate time to each of them to know where one begins and the other one stops, and then also where they interact with each other. So get clear and then get specific. You can then begin to take action to balance. Yeah. I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Amanda. I can also maybe just add on this as well. I think it's just like coming off of what like Amanda said, it's like very good to have this on paper or like somewhere out of your mind. Because sometimes you sort of like, the things that you sort of have to do and the things that are maybe troubling, or some things that are like just there, like you have it in your mind and you're sort of ruminating about it. Okay, I need to do this. There's this balance that I need, but you're still doing it in your mind, and your mind is not sort of shutting off and it's like processing in the background. And that takes a lot of energy and power in the background when you don't even know about it. So it's good to sort of like pour it out. Like if you're with your team like of researchers and you realize like this imbalance, like just like sort of map it out with like your team and just have it on paper. So you sort of like pour it out on paper and just leave it there. And if you have the opportunity to come back again, you can pick it up from where you left it off. And that frees up like space in your mind to think about something else, right? So not just like keeping everything in your mind and knowing that, okay, I need to do this and this and that. That will also overwhelm you, stress you out, and take you back to the burnout we were talking about.
And maybe also really that it's really also about the research ethics that Katherine was speaking about. That it's very important to understand. So this is the business goal that we have with this type of research. What is the impact of that psychologically speaking or sociologically speaking? And to do that type of work upfront so that you know, and that you have a real informed consent where you know the risks of what the type of research that you're going to do. So I'm not sure if this is related to you yourself or to the people you're working with, but I think it goes both ways, and it's important to understand it both ways and to work with it that way.
Thank you. I've seen your hand, Elizabeth. I'll give you an opportunity right after this question, because you've touched on mental chatter, and that's a question that one of our participants raised. Like, how do you stop fantasizing about undone tasks? what are some of the strategies that you've found to be useful over time, in addition to what you've raised, Sasha?
I think this is also something I'm still figuring out. I think that the question came from Kalama, sort of like dreaming about undone tasks. I think what I've sort of like, maybe just personally speaking, and I can give it to someone else to also speak, just personally, having like a clear distinction between when my work ends and when my personal life begins after work is really helpful, because what I realized I was doing a lot was taking work deep into the night. And then the last thing that I have on my mind before sleeping is work. So what would I be dreaming about, right? I'll be dreaming about work. So just like making that distinction between, okay, work ends at this time. And I think it's also very important to mention the fact that like, at least most of us at SoUXR are like remote workers, and other like researchers as well, like are remote workers. So sometimes the lines are pretty blurred. And it's not as though like we are being told to work deep into the night. That's not what I'm saying at all. But like, just sometimes you're just going and going, and you actually sort of forget that's like you're going deep into the night. So I sort of like set like some alarms to say, stop work, Sasha, and maybe do something else. So I think that break helps me to say, at this point, I'm done for the day. Even if I'm not really done, it's done for the day. The next day will just continue for itself. And that, I think, has helped me a little bit with sort of stop dreaming about work. I hope that helps you, Kalama. Anyone else?
Any additions from Amanda, Lily, Catherine? Right, thank you. So I'll give it up to you after Elia. Elia, your hand was up.
Yes. Sorry, it's just me. I just wanted to ask to what Sasha said. I think also taking the time to wind down before you get to sleep help you relax your mind and just be in a state where you don't think about all the things that are stressing you out when it comes to work. That has been helpful for me, that's for sure.
And yeah, just hearing what Elia said, I think sometimes it's easier said than done. And we sort of need to be very intentional that like we need to do it, because putting your well-being at the center is like very important. So the first thing is you just being aware that like my well-being is important, then looking for the strategies, and then making sure that you put those strategies in place. Right? Because like, I guess like some of these things that we're sharing, we hear them all the time. You need to unwind, you need to write the things down to help with mind chatter, all of those things. But you need to be very intentional to ensure that these things you're doing it, because nobody is really going to take care of you, right? And if your health is not top notch, you cannot show up for work. So you need to be able to be very intentional about the things, and the things that we've been hearing about all the time, sort of practicalize it in a way that works for you as well.
Thank you so much. There was another hand from Elizabeth. Please shoot.
So my hand was up for the question where I think it was balancing psychological, sociological, and business needs and business goals. How do you balance that? I love the point everyone has shared. I also wanted to add that sometimes, I guess that's our work as researchers, balancing all these perspectives. And sometimes, yeah, it's good to list out what it might mean for these different things, but sometimes it might also be good to talk to your manager. Is it also like a skill issue? Because you're growing as you go ahead with that. So not always absorbing, oh, it's something I should do better. Maybe you need some training, maybe you need some. So have conversation with someone to help you unpack what that means and what specifically you can do to grow at each of these levels and like balance it, or maybe compartmentalize. looking at your skill, am I lacking in like the business side of things? Or am I lacking in like the sociological side of things? And just being able to have that honest conversation can help.
That is profound, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for weighing in. And we have 2 more questions and we'll wrap it at that. Apologies if I will not have touched your question. So the last one is, how do you handle colleagues who do not have empathy and occasionally make inappropriate comments?
I can talk to that a bit. I think it's really important that, you know, inappropriate comments are inappropriate comments, right? So starting there, if somebody is having inappropriate comments, you set your boundaries, you let them know first time, hey, I don't appreciate that comment, please don't do that again. If people keep doing it and you're not capable of handling it and you feel that this is really bothering you, go and speak with your manager, go and speak with somebody who can do something about this. This is very important because inappropriate is inappropriate. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you know, I think that the answer that Jan was giving here is also really quite good, that very often these type of comments, they're not meant as vicious as they come out. And if you are what you call an empath, so a very sensitive person, they can come in really harsh, right? While they were not meant that badly. And so I think there it's very important to really also do your own work in that. So to understand that your sensitivity is maybe higher than the sensitivity of other people. And so you have to really learn, again, to set those boundaries for yourself. But what you can also do really practically is what I was talking about with the reflective empathy. You can tell your colleague, I feel that you're not really hearing what I have to say. Could you just repeat back to me what I'm trying to tell you so that I know whether you understand me or not? And that's a practical thing to do. It's not offensive and it might really help to clear the misunderstanding that's there.
Your speaking up is important. The last question I have goes to Amanda. You mentioned that your organization is big on ensuring that all Africans get quality mental health care. I'm keen to understand, what are some of the pointers of quality mental health care that we all need to be aware of?
So when we say quality mental health care, one of the things that we look at is, first of all, the access to the care, and then the type of care that is provided. So empathetic, it is compassionate, it is patient, they listen, very supportive, and it's also focused on good service recovery so that if a client is not well taken care of and they make a complaint, we're able to advocate for them. It's like, yeah, we hear you and we're going to try to make changes and make sure things are much better. We have a much better experience. Quality healthcare is also looking at the clinicians that are offering the healthcare, making sure that their continuous development is a priority. They are doing the best type of work they can do in terms of their well-being and also the work they churn out. So they're professionals, they're good at their job, and they are not overwhelmed by work. So their well-being is good and they are well compensated a living wage for them to be able to provide their care. Because living in Nigeria, I find that a lot of doctors are good doctors, but they're not happy doctors, and that affects the quality of care because they don't feel well compensated for their work. So quality healthcare is not just about the client, but also the person providing it. And to also ensure that the environment that they're providing it in is also a decent one. Because we work remotely, and we have spaces that we use for therapy sessions. I remember one of the times when we were in between spaces, we went to one of a space that we had found during like an emergency session period, and the client sent an email back saying they didn't particularly like the experience there. So we had to now make sure, like, top priority, that wherever it is that we're going to visit our clients, have sessions with them, that these are places that they feel conducive and comfortable in, and they also feel like they're well considered, like it's a nice environment to be at. So making sure that the space is also, conducive for them and also affordable. Now, with this current economy, affordability is relative. And as much as we try to make sure that many people have access to us and that financial challenges are not a reason why a person can't access healthcare, we cannot deny that we cannot serve everybody. But what we can do is we can try to accommodate people. So that is, we offered discounted sessions for students, for youth corpers, and for artists, and then for other professionals, we offer discounts to our clients. We also try to organize events where we go physically to speak there so people have a chance to ask us questions like this. We show up at events, we have talks online, send out a newsletter. So whichever way, if you cannot afford access therapy in terms of, okay, I can't pay for therapy, there are other ways you can be able to access therapy, maybe by watching a video we put online or our YouTube page on Instagram, or reading a newsletter that we publish, or you came to a talk. So we're trying to, that diversification in terms of getting good healthcare does not mean that you have to always talk to a therapist when you can't afford it. So let there be other solutions that you can find. So we also create materials that people can buy for very cheap. 1,000 naira, 2,300 naira, which is not up to $1. So people can use that to reflect on their well-being as well. So yeah, so these are some things, and making sure that whatever sort of care we're providing that is evidence-based, we're looking at safe, effective, evidence-based care that we know it's been tested, it works, and this is where we're going to continue it. So yeah. And then one more thing I try to make sure that we have a point on is making sure whatever research that we're using, as much as we're going to get research from US and from Europe, that we try to prioritize getting research from Africa itself, so that we're getting research that genuinely speaks to our well-being and us as individuals. We're not just like trying to get research for the sake of research. No, we want research that understands the nuances of being African and coming from a continent like ours with our own history and experiences. So we try to make sure that we prioritize that. Even in the newsletters that we give out, the research we use is always African. So we try to limit maybe just like one European, one Western, because we want people to start thinking of themselves as human beings, and for Africans to start validating themselves and knowing that our behaviors can be informed through study, and we can make ourselves better by understanding like, oh, this research has found out that if you do this, you get this. So maybe we should try more of that. So for us, by us, very much. So yeah, so that's what we mean when I can't cover everything, but that's pretty much what we mean when we say quality healthcare for Africans.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the detailed elaboration. We have come to the end.
Just to add on, I just wanted to just note how like very interesting all the organizations are sort of like on the panel are sort of like really contextualizing everything that we are doing to the African continent or wherever like we are working at. I think that's like super important and very super important to us as youth as well as a research and design agency. So we're glad to have everyone on the panel and just share all of this information to the audience as well. So thank you.
Yeah. Context is king in research. So we have come to the end of our webinar today, and I'd like to take this opportunity to just thank all our sponsors for the event, that is Ndidi, Nigeria, Empathetic, Intervision, UX Kitchen, Nairobi, SoUXR Design in Ghana, but last but not least, our amazing audience. Thank you for all your attention and delightful engagement today. Guess we can appreciate ourselves, right? And myself too. And as we conclude this discussion on researcher wellness, I hope that we can continue to keep in mind that we are all worthy of happiness and peace of mind. And the journey towards wellness in research, professional wellness, is collaborative and continuous. This is just a beginning. It needs commitment from different stakeholders in the ecosystem. And as we continue to prioritize our mental health, promoting work-life balance, and providing supportive environments in our different workplaces, we'll be able to unlock our full potential as a workforce. And this will help us to drive sustainable development globally. Stay tuned for the next report of SoUXR Design on the state of user research in Africa. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for
I don't know if
having
there's
us.
anything,
Thank you.
if there's anything
Thank you
else from the
very
team.
much.
If not, adios, goodbye, sayonara. How do we say bye in French, Lily?
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye
How do you say
bye.
bye in
Thanks so
Ghana?
much.
Thank you. You can type in the chat. Bye from Nepal. Bye from France. Bye from Kenya, Koheri. It's been a pleasure.
Mhm.